Okay, thank you very much for having me. My name is Breck Baldwin. I'm a research scientist in the statistics department, working for Andrew Gilman in the Laplace lab, doing sort of project management and whatnot in the Bayesian modeling space. So let me move on to immediately who all is involved in this. So we have myself, and then my boss, Andrew Yeoman, who's the PI on the relevant work. There is Simon Maskell, who is the PI on the Big Hypotheses project at the University of Liverpool. And this is a joint project between us and them. And then we'll talk about some other universities involved as well later on. But this is a joint effort, and thank you to the funders listed below. Before I move on, is there a way to get rid of the view on the left? I think so. Let's see. There we go. Thank you. All right. Sorry about that. So the outline of the talk, we're going to overview what CoDatMo is, sort of at a high level, sort of give you a feel for what's going on with this site and this resource around COVID. And then I'm going to do a brief intro advertisement for Bayesian modeling and STAN language. And then we're going to go over some of the repositories that are in the CoDatMo system, and then finally some resources for those interested in either participating in CoDatMo, learning more about Bayesian modeling and whatnot. And as I wrote this outline, I was like, wow, I was reviewing it. This is the most boring thing in the world. So let me just contextualize it, pretend it was a TED talk for a second. We're a bunch of statisticians, and we are, under the pressure of an incredible outbreak, and we want to try and help. And that's actually the truth. We're trying to, sort of give a little context to what happened here. Liverpool was not particularly strong in epidemiology or anything like that, but had opportunities to work with them. And so we're just trying to help out and the overall scientific process. And this is what we do as Bayesians. We try to go help out epidemiologists build better models. All right. So CoDatMo goals and history. CoDatMo stands for COVID Data Models, and it started probably in conception in August of 2020, when we realized that STAN, which is the Bayesian programming language that I kind of represent here, was being used in a lot of COVID modeling. On our forums and in discussions that we knew about, there were about 20 COVID models in active development. This is just what we knew about in 2020 of August. And so at our annual conference, we decided that Simon reached out to us and said, hey, do you have any ideas about how we could work together and use STAN more usefully? And in particular, he had spoken with the JDBC, the UK Joint Biosecurity Center, which is our CDC equivalent. It was sort of on an interim basis for a while. And they wanted a way to understand and compare all of these sort of panicked epidemiological models that are written in various languages in response to the emergency in the UK. And so these were one-offs. People were calling in their predictions for coefficients like RT on a weekly basis. And then they were basically charting them and trying to do public policy based on this information. And it seemed to make sense that could we possibly put these models on a more common footing by putting them in a well-designed language for this kind of activity, which STAN is and Bayesian modeling is, and then also maybe share ideas. So we'll get into the details of that a little more, but that was kind of the intention, is can we come up with a place for us to share ideas, improve models, just kind of a little playground for epidemiological modeling with COVID. So in November of 2020, this got shoved into an NSF RAPID grant at Columbia, and we got a little funding to do this. So the RAPID grant program were just quick ways to get NSF money out. This was actually, I think, CDC funded in the end, but through the NSF as the scientific vetting body. And so we got the award, and then we started in earnest. And December 2nd of 2020, we stood up a site, and this is on GitHub. And this is, if you're not a software developer, GitHub is a very comfortable place for anyone that's doing software development to share information, to share code, even to have discussions. It's really quite a nice resource that's free. It's owned by Microsoft. I don't know its penetration in the medical community. So in December 2nd, we had a model example, we had data a little bit, and then we had some submissions that we'd gotten, which is University of Liverpool had put in their own submission as with an SEIR model that kind of worked on 111 call data. So they wanted publicly available data and predicted deaths. Then around December 8th, we got Ye Olde Lancaster in, which was just sort of friends of friend kind of thing. And we had ideas of trying to pull in Cambridge models, the Imperial College models, and so on and so forth in the UK. And we thought we had a pretty good run on that because people seemed interested in doing this. Things kind of, and then I put in, which we will look at, a simple SIR model just to serve as a template for people to work with largely. So that was around the 20th. So the rethinking, so we had to rethink our appeal a little bit because we're starting to get pushback on, you know, what are you going to do with my model? Do I get credit for this? This is sort of standard academic concerns, which are legitimate in a fundraising environment. And so we kind of jiggered ourselves into a site that was doing model reproduction and information sharing, as opposed to, you know, being the site where you get the model. We weren't clear on it at that point, but then we decided that, okay, let's just make it a reproduction site. We're just going to try and reproduce science. It's a good thing to do. And that seems to be more successful. So it's actually kind of an honor to be done in this site is kind of the goal. And you know, terrifying honor, reproducing your work is always, you know, an interesting thing with pluses and minuses, but overall it's a plus, I think. Anyone that's a serious researcher would love to see it. So that's kind of where we've gone. And we're not expecting anything of the individual contributors other than maybe clarification about information. And so then we go and do the modeling ourselves, all right, in this reproduction effort. And then we find ourselves, and then about a month ago, we got our first not in the UK model that satisfied another criteria, which is we wanted information sharing. And so Uninove, a fellow that's a Bayesian modeler there, got excited about integrating Twitter data into some Brazilian models. And we got someone from the outside to come in, and we're starting to work together. And that's very, very exciting for us because what we're trying to do is do information sharing. And this seems like it's starting to work at some level. April 14th, we find ourselves at this presentation. All right, so that's the high level. This is what the site looks like. It's very sparse. We've not paid a lot of attention on graphical niceness. These are all done on GitHub pages, by the way. It's very easy to stand up small research sites in GitHub. And so this is using something called GitHub Pages, and it's really doesn't cost any money if you're a nonprofit, and it's quite nice. So the goals of CoDatMo. So it's COVID data model, and we're trying to replicate and host COVID-19 models. And we're interested in Bayesian modeling language. These languages like STAN and PyMC and things like that. And I'll describe in more detail what Bayesian modeling languages are a little bit in a bit. Then we have, and then what we wanted to do is just get the word out that we existed and want to improve the overall quality of these models. And you know what, I do not have, sorry. Sorry, I don't have a way of keeping track of time. All right, I have it fine now. And the intention really is information sharing, hopefully software improvement. So by reproducing a model, it probably will become a better model. That's kind of one of our beliefs. And so that is a sideware sort of software engineering goal. We're not trying to improve them in the software engineering sense of making them robust in, you know, sort of data, networking data issues, security issues, but robust in the sense of, is it a good statistical model? Does it survive the kind of tests? And we'll talk about what some of those tests are in a second. Whoops. Hello. Okay, there we go. So this is just one of the, this is the top level of the repo, which is what the guts look like. It's an organization called CoDatMo, and each university or each project gets its own repository that it owns. All right, and then those are the units that we're really operating over, and they're completely independent. They don't have to share staff. They don't have to share permissions. So there's an organization called CoDatMo. Each organization can have, then they're just sub repos that do things like we have Uninove here. We also have some data, a data directory where we try to standardize data, things like that. All right. So let's talk about STAN a little bit. So we have over 50 models for COVID-19 written in STAN at this point on last estimate. And why is this? What are we doing? If you're not familiar with Bayesian modeling, we completely understand why you don't know that, you know, that we even exist. We still are, I think, explaining our existence to most communities when we show up. But in the end, what drives it is hierarchical models for most of our new users, or people that come in that have a hierarchical model they can't fit very well using other techniques, more frequentist-oriented techniques. And a hierarchical model in this sense is that if we're thinking about it, we have one region that is, you're modeling COVID there, and then you have a neighboring region, and you would like information, this is sort of this partial pooling idea, information from the neighboring region to inform estimates of the current region that you're trying to do estimates for. You don't want to forget all this information about what's around you. There's also temporal effects. Temporal models are a little more straightforward in most modeling scenarios, but this partial pooling does a couple of really useful things in that it helps regularize inference, so we don't overfit because we're not looking at individual localities with complete non-knowledge of what's going on around it or in the rest of the country. They also tend to, sort of settle in useful ways that can maybe, I don't know, the information flow can be correlated in useful ways across all these domains. All right. The other thing that Bayesian modeling is very good at is noise tolerant models. And so there's a lot of noise in the COVID data, and we have a lot of small and medium data sets. By the time you stratify a data set down into regions, or even a lot of these units that we're doing inference over are 200,000 individuals or less. This is both in Brazil and the UK. It's interesting they settle on that unit. And by the time you get down to that size, you can get to very small effects in terms of what your actual samples are. It's very much like trying to post-stratify election results, and Bayesian modeling is very good at that task. The other thing that's good is, particularly in these low knowledge situations or where there is prior knowledge, is the ability to integrate a lot of prior knowledge into your Bayesian model. And this is the big controversy around Bayesian modeling. You have prior knowledge and you're going to update it with data, and then you get posterior knowledge. But in this case, it's actually very advantageous because there's a lot of prior knowledge that's known. Take advantage of it as opposed to trying to bootstrap every aspect of your model. Another benefit is that these models tend to be, or can be, they don't have to be, but they tend to be very interpretable by a human being. And that turns into, then you have a causal model and you can start doing counterfactual reasoning. And at this point, we're very interested in counterfactual reasoning, obviously, with COVID interventions. And so these models are just amenable to that. Another thing that people don't really think about so much, but it's a feature that I'm emphasizing more as I talk about Bayesian modeling, is there's a huge effort on inference safety. And inference safety just means, did your converged model do the right thing? And most samplers, standard things that you know about, even if you are a Bayesian, like Gibbs sampling, and neural network approaches, you really don't have a lot of on-the-fly inference diagnostics that tell you that things are going wrong. These are all sampling approaches. They're all numeric. There's all approximations all the way down. So some effort into inference safety is actually quite valuable and rare, actually. So that's one of the nice things about it. How do we do this in a couple of ways? We have a sort of a very a formal Bayesian workflow that we really try to encourage people to use as a model building process. And that hopefully improves the likelihood of having a good model that's actually doing what you think it does. There's tons of inference out diagnostics, either for posteriors or during runtime that exist in the STAN language and in others. And the big deal is that there's the self-monitoring gradient crawler. That is what basically says, are we off of possible gradients? And that gives you throws you errors in the inference process. It's called HMC with nuts. And there's a divergent sample diagnostic. It's very useful. The other thing that's good are these generative models. And again, they're mechanistic. You can build them mechanistically if you want, tend to be human interpretable. But the biggest thing is they can be, they really support simulation. And simulation is probably the strongest way by which we can validate that our models are doing something sane. Basically, you try different parameters, create some data, see whether you can recover those parameters. You'll see evidence of that later, but that's a big dimension of why we have some confidence that these models work well. And simulation is really a nice way to do that. Okay, and then last, just a little bit of an idea of our impact in the relevant fields for you guys. So STAN was released in 2012, PyMC3, I think in 2014. This is for PyMC3, which is another Bayesian modeling language, STAN, and then RViz, which is a posterior processing package. And just over the years, our growth in relevant disciplines. And so we see that biochemistry, genetics, and molecular biology, we're up to 683 citations to one of those packages. In Scopus.com is the search engine I used, citations to one of the packages in the references section. I mean, these aren't, you know, rock solid uses, but this is just an estimate of growth. And the thing that's important here is not so much the raw numbers as much as it is the growth rate, which is pretty much exponential about every year and a half. So we're growing, we're becoming more relevant, and so that's the end of the ad. The one thing, the elephant in the room that we need to talk about is deep learning. And that is something that is often thought of when we talk about STAN, even though they're very different beasts, and I just want to address it. Deep learning and the neural network work has been astoundingly effective. Really, we have self-driving cars. We have it's a next wave of AI. And as an AI practitioner, I'm actually quite blown away with its performance. The thing to understand, though, is that deep learning is limited. Everyone got really excited. You know, once you see Elon Musk with a self-driving car, then you're basically okay. You know, what's next? Everything can be done with deep learning, and it really can't. Deep learning is a correlate to signal processing systems, let's say, in cognitive architectures. It's kind of handling, you know, vision, speech, a lot of language. It gets you from noisy to usable conceptual stuff. And then you have executive functions in your brain that maybe do other things with it. But that's why it's so good at vision. That's why and then you do logic on top of that vision to do things like self-driving cars. And so the relationship, so the issues with deep learning are that those models tend to be utterly opaque. You have no way of understanding what's going on in them. And they're not appropriate for a lot of these tasks because they actually aren't very good at, you know, allowing us to manipulate parts of the model. So for instance, that I'm unaware of at this point, any huge deep learning successes in just COVID prediction or anything like that. The hierarchical nature is maybe is fouling it up. I'm not sure, but if I don't know that for sure, but at least the last time I checked, there weren't any deep learning systems that were doing super good stuff in that space. But they work with STAN models perfectly well. So STAN can sit down, or Bayesian models, the deep learning system produces observations. Those observations fit into a Bayesian model. That Bayesian model can reason about it, propagate around information, and do something out the other end of it. So they're actually complementary technologies. They are not competing for the same space. Also, deep learning is not very good on small data sets and things like that. So enough of that. So let's look at some repos. And I think that is, just to give you an idea of what we have. So we'll go first to our simple SIR model that I have prepared for us so nicely. If I can find it, there it is. Okay, so this is, sorry, I'll keep the tabs up just because I have to move around a little bit. So we named our recreation of somebody else's work. In this case, this is a case study that we have in STAN for SIR models. So I just used it as an exemplar to encourage people, to show people what we're planning on doing, and also do it and give other people a structure to work with if they decide to put their own models into this structure. So this model reproduction checklist is in some sense a validation checklist for does the system do what it says it does? Is it, you know, have we reproduced it properly? So on and so forth. And it's meant to operate over Bayesian models, so it has Bayesian inference constraints and checks. So the first thing is there's a little description here. This goes to a actual GitHub repo, which is different than what they're seeing right here. It's a little confusing to people. I should have opened that up. Let's see if we can get it to go. So this is what this simple SIR repo looks like. We have essentially a data directory, an output directory, STAN file directory, and then information. And then actually the file that we're looking at there is this index.html here. And this is meant to be just sort of a unit by which someone can come as a researcher and be able to pull together the information they need to reproduce this model, understand this model, and move forward. Important thing is that we hope that the language of the model will be at the level, you know, at the confluence of statisticians, epidemiologists, and computer scientists. These are the people that are working on these things. And so we're really encouraging variable names and things like that to sort of span all three disciplines. So we've done the computer science and statistics trade-off of that. We have the Greek letter as the first character in the name. So if it's alpha, it'll be alpha and then underscore or a underscore, and then a descriptive computer science name. So that helps the computer scientists work with this. How the epidemiologists interface with that, I don't know, but we're just trying to make stuff a little easier for people to understand as they move forward. So we start off with a model description. We'll just go through it. And this is, in this case, what we have is the model description that reproduces as a case study That is a separate document. So this is where we would put the original publication. This is where we would, I would love to be able to change to that tab. This thing is controlling it. All right, anyway, that's not helping. Okay, ah, dang it. Sorry guys, I am not super Zoom fluent. Here we go. Okay, so this is the actual case study, and it is a really nice introduction to both Bayesian modeling and to SIR models. And so they go through and they put it through. There's your nice ODE that you're going to be using, and that's the S, the I, and the R, and the transition functions between them, and so on and so forth. So this is the original publication, and then we come back to our effort, which is recreating this and saying, hey, we did this on our own with our own data, or with similarly edited data, or with your data, and here it is, and here it is working. All right, so we have the model description. That takes a lot of strain off of the person that has to organize this thing. You don't have to do the full description of the work. You just want to refer to it. There's always data munging. It's one of the more important parts. Statistics is pretty good about doing data munging for you, so you have a usable object. I don't know about other disciplines. Computer science is pretty awful about this. So try to get the data, do what you need to do to get the data, and then be able to, and we call this data munging in computer science, and you just got to push it around. And then we get to our STAN program. So we'll show you what the STAN program, so this is actually what you need to run this in R. The language that we use typically is R, but STAN has interfaces in Python and other languages as well. I'll give you all the resources, I'll cover that more. The STAN program, this is the configuration of the ODE in the top part here. I don't know if that's gonna work. Okay, so the top, this functions block, that is the ODE setup. Between that, the data block is at the top of the screen now. That's just data getting in, a little bit of transformation of data. Parameters are the things that we're estimating. There's some transform parameters, and then the model. And this is where the action is, which is, you can see, is really quite simple and quite close to what the mathematical specification is, which is one of the goals of the STAN language, is to try and take away some of the noise of using standard computer science idioms to do statistical modeling. So this is very much inspired by the graphical math languages that preceded it, JAGs and bugs and whatnot. So it's very clean. So you can see why there's motivation to try and get models written at this level of abstraction, so you can compare and contrast. If your likelihood's buried in some C++ code that no one can, parse, written by a graduate student, that's just not a good way to share information. So this is a very nice way for people to share the information in concrete terms. And then we go and we run the model, and then we can see we start doing checks on it. So this is the model running, and then we want to do some validation on it. There's some internal diagnostics, R hat, we want to check that, we'll graph that. This divergent transition check, did we stay on the tracks as we were doing our sampling? We want to compare the 4 chains, so on and so forth. So this is, this validation step hopefully brings enough confidence to people that are working with it that there's something useful to work with. We're a little stuck here, in all honesty, because what happens is we've re-implemented some models, and it's just kind of like a wah-wah. What are we doing now? And I think what's exciting about the Brazilians getting interested is that we now have a customer for those nice re-implemented models. We might see the first case of that model transitioning over to doing some work in Brazil. So it's an early project, and we're just getting started, but this is the, essentially, where we stand now. It's kind of what I did on my summer vacation, slightly oriented talk. Let me go back to here. All right, all right, so we go to Uninnovate. So these guys, we've been working together for a month, and just sort of an example of how this went. This was a person that showed up, this professor that showed up at the weekly STAN meeting, and he's a Bayesian modeler. We were talking about doing various classes of COVID modeling, and then we talked about using Twitter as data source for self-reporting COVID symptoms and trying to do adding that to some predictive models. And then it turned out they were downloading Portuguese data. And so he's very interested in maybe working with that Twitter data and trying to do some modeling in Brazil. And he has a bunch of students and a bunch of things going on there that sound very promising. So we wanted to make a connection there. So we invited him over to CoDatMo. And then my training is a computational linguist, so I got involved with trying to figure out how to annotate Twitter data, how to do an annotator agreement studies, how to build an annotation standard and do the Twitter thing, right, in Portuguese, and then start building these models. It's very early days. This is just a month-old project. We're just starting to consider models. I think we're going to map one of the Liverpool models over and see, because it takes 111 call data, which is the UK's emergency services, and then apply that to Twitter data for in Brazil. So it's happening. I mean, pardon?
That was your 1 minute warning.
Okay, thank you. Let's get back to the screen. And so resources. Was there a chat? I was going to put in the chat the link to these slides. So let me talk about resources. So real quick, we have the CoDatMo project, and that's the URL for it there. If you want to help us, we're looking for epidemiologists or anybody that's interested in doing this class of modeling. We really could use some epidemiologists. And the others, let us help you. Do you have classes of problems that you're interested in that some Bayesian model can help with, or if you just want to come hang out with us? The slides are at that link. I'll put that in the chat if I can figure it out. And then there's a bunch of stuff. Stan has got interfaces in R, Python, and Scala. There's high-level interfaces as well. And then if you're thinking about Columbia resources, I'll just move ahead. Bayesian statistics for the social sciences, GR 5065. There's a QMS class taught by Ben Goodrich. If you have some students, or if you yourself want to go, that's probably the best training in Stan that you can get. They don't quite get to Stan, but they cover the Bayesian modeling really well. And that's the class that you want to consider taking in these resources. So otherwise, contact me. And thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take some questions. Oh, I'll put a link to the slides in the chat. Let's see if I can figure out how to do that. And I'll stop screen sharing.